Look at the history books and you will see the titans who built America. You know their names: Rockefeller, Vanderbilt, Carnegie, Morgan. They are the undisputed kings of wealth. Or, so we were taught. What if I told you there was a shadow behind the throne? A man so secretive, so aggressively private, that he went an entire lifetime without giving a single newspaper interview. Yet behind closed doors, he controlled half of the railroad lines in the United States. He held the strings to the largest banks on earth. And when the mighty J.P. Morgan needed saving, this is the man he begged for cash. His name was George Fisher Baker. And today, we are going to expose exactly how he executed the greatest stealth wealth takeover in human history. Welcome back to Nadir Finance History. Let's follow the money. To understand the sheer scale of Baker's invisible empire, we have to go back to the chaos of the American Civil War. The year is 1863. The country is tearing itself apart. The government is bleeding money, and the financial system is on the brink of total catastrophic collapse. Enter a 23-year-old clerk from upstate New York. George Fisher Baker wasn't born into massive wealth. He didn't have oil fields like Rockefeller or a shipping empire like Vanderbilt. What he had was a terrifyingly calm understanding of human panic. While older, wealthier men were hoarding their gold and terrified of the collapsing markets, Baker saw an exploit. The U.S. government had just passed the National Banking Act, desperately trying to raise money to fund the Union. Baker partnered with a few investors to scrape together $100,000, a massive sum at the time, and bought the first charter for a brand new institution. They called it the First National Bank of the City of New York. This was the masterstroke. Baker didn't just want to be a banker. He wanted to bankroll the government itself. He took the bank's capital and aggressively bought U.S. government bonds when everyone else thought the government might not survive the war. It was the ultimate gamble. If the Union lost, Baker was bankrupt. If they won, he would hold the debt of the United States of America. Spoiler alert, the Union won, and George Fisher Baker, still in his 20s, suddenly found himself sitting on a mountain of high-yielding, flawless government debt. He had effectively tied his personal wealth to the survival of the American nation. But this was just phase one. Over the next 40 years, Baker perfected a strategy that would make him the most feared, yet invisible predator on Wall Street. He called it the Sphinx strategy. While other bankers like J.P. Morgan were flashy, throwing massive parties and parading in front of Congress, Baker was a ghost. He sat at a small desk in the back of his bank. No private office, no nameplate. He simply watched the markets and waited for blood in the streets. And in 1873, the blood flowed. The Panic of 1873 wiped out a massive portion of the American economy. Railroad companies, which were the tech stocks of their day, began going bankrupt overnight. Millions of dollars vanished in hours. Wall Street was in absolute hysterics. But George Fisher Baker? He just smiled. He took the massive cash reserves of the First National Bank, stepped into the carnage, and began buying distressed railroad bonds for pennies on the dollar. He didn't want to run the trains. He wanted to own the debt of the men who did. By the time the panic subsided, Baker controlled major voting blocks in the Central Railroad of New Jersey, the Erie Railroad, and the Delaware, Lackawanna, and Western. He was slowly wrapping his tentacles around the central nervous system of American commerce. Every piece of coal, every ton of steel, every passenger moving across the Northeast paid a silent toll to George Fisher Baker. But the true display of his terrifying power came during the catastrophic Panic of 1907. This was the event that nearly broke America. The stock market crashed by 50%. Banks were failing by the hour. People were lining up in the streets to pull their money out of trust companies, only to find the vaults completely empty. The Secretary of the Treasury rushed to New York to beg the financial titans for a bailout. History books will tell you that J.P. Morgan single-handedly locked the bankers in his library and forced them to save the economy. That is a fantastic story, but it's a myth. J.P. Morgan was the face of the operation, but George Fisher Baker was the wallet. Behind closed doors in that library, Morgan turned to Baker, because Baker's First National Bank was sitting on more liquid cash reserves than the U.S. Treasury itself. Baker calmly agreed to put up the millions needed to stop the panic. Without Baker's silent nod of approval, Morgan would have failed. America would have defaulted. By the 1920s, Baker's wealth was almost incalculable. He sat on the board of directors of 43 of the largest corporations in the world: U.S. Steel, AT&T, the Pullman Company. He owned them all. When he finally died in 1931 at the age of 91, the true scale of his fortune was briefly revealed to the public during probate, and it shocked the world. But his family, trained in his secretive ways, quickly dispersed the funds into impenetrable trusts and foundations, erasing his name from the public consciousness once again. George Fisher Baker proved that the loudest man in the room is rarely the most powerful. The true rulers of the financial world don't want fame. They don't want magazine covers. They want control. And for 60 years, a quiet man at a simple desk controlled it all. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to Nadir Finance History for more incredible money stories.